Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Red Lines, a show where we dive into daring subjects and cross some red lines of political speak. Today, we're going to be talking about how the Russian economy is finally collapsing, or is it? And what influenced it? And also, how is that going to impact Ukraine and what should we do next and more? Today, with me, I have operator Starsky, who's going to help us answer this question.
Hello, my friends. I'm Operator Starsky, Ukrainian veteran and YouTuber speaking about Ukraine and all the decent people of the world who support us.
Amazing. I think that all of you know a lot more about Operator Starsky at this point than he introduced about himself. And if for some reason you don't know him, well, then here he is, and he's fantastic. You should check out his channel. And we have these conversations quite often. I feel like maybe it's like a monthly briefing between us. So a lot has happened in the world today. I actually did the brief earlier today, which means that I read absolutely everything there was to read about the news. And Europe is super stepping up. Europe is really kind of like, it seems like they woke up and they were like, crap, we didn't do enough. And now we either need to like really start doing it or we're not going to be in a good situation very soon. And then there is always the United States that is doing absolutely the opposite of what it should be doing. And I think we ought to start with Trump's new special representative to Ukraine and Russia, because obviously we don't deserve to have separate representatives. It's one person, and this person allegedly, rumor has it, it's been breaking news in America that his resolution and Trump's team's resolution to the conflict in Ukraine, we went back to that rhetoric, is that we either do a frozen conflict where Russia gets what Russia has right now, and we never get to join NATO or for the next like 50 years or whatever, or we give Russia everything it wants, which to me, it sounds like the oblasts that Russia did not invade yet, and we can get into NATO. So I feel like you will have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I would really like to know why he cannot just ask people's opinion in Ukraine what we want. Because Ukrainians want to join NATO and Ukrainians also want to return home, for example, to Mariupol occupied by Russians. I think, people like this individual, they should probably look at the things from the standpoint of international law that was violated, because one way or another Ukrainian still has internationally recognized borders that were basically violated by Russian terrorists. And let's probably do this. Let's agree that if Ukrainians want to join NATO, this is something that they should do, right? Because I'm sorry, this man is American. He's not a Ukrainian person. He's not a Ukrainian citizen. I don't think that he should decide whether Ukrainians want to join NATO or not, right? And second thing, let's probably fix the law. Let's probably make Russia face justice for what they did, right? Again, it's a proper thing, because if we tolerate Russian fascism, if we tolerate Russian crimes, and if we give what Russia took from Ukraine by force, if you just give it to Russia, like, you can use it, you took it, you use it, then apparently we don't recognize authority of international law, we don't recognize authority of International Crime Court, we don't recognize authority of United Nations. Basically, we recognize the world where anybody can do whatever they want if they have nukes and a lot of manpower. So I don't really see this a good solution. That is my answer. Like, I don't want to even joke about it because it's so ridiculous that it's not even funny.
It's also kind of like our two options are you're screwed, Russia gets what Russia wants, or you're screwed a little less and Russia still gets what Russia wants.
Yeah, like, can we do something so it's not like, terrorists finally get what they want, but we do something in, like in, let's protect the international law, let's help our allies, which is Ukraine, right? Because Russia was never American ally. Russia always wanted the US to be destroyed, to see its demise, to see people in United States suffering. And Ukraine, for some freaking reason, gave up its nukes so the world could be a safer place. So who helps Ukraine now, and why do they want to help Russians so much to achieve their goals? That's a very good question. Maybe like he has some, secret Russian friends that give him like, valuable gifts from time to time. That is just my opinion, but this is how Russians work.
Yeah, it's also very interesting because this the rhetoric of like, oh, Ukraine is either in NATO or not in NATO, and Russia is going to stop based on what we do with NATO, right, is problematic because it makes the invasion sound like it's because of NATO. And it really isn't, right? It's sort of like, oh, well, if we give Russia what it wants and Ukraine doesn't join NATO, then Russia is not going to continue attacking Ukraine. It's like, that's not the point. Russia is going to continue attacking Ukraine, especially if Ukraine is not in NATO. Russia is going to continue doing what Russia is doing, and this rhetoric is very problematic. But then again, like, I didn't expect anything else from the Trump cabinet, and it's interesting because there have been so many communications and conversations around the world and in America being like, oh, you're exaggerating, you just don't know what he's going to do. He's going to like do something new. It's like, this conversation is not only bad because it's bad. It's also bad because this is the type of stuff that we went through in the first year of the invasion until everybody finally understood that this is not going to work. And we're back to square one. Like, my only hope with this brilliant plan is that they bring it to Putin, and Putin is going to be like, no.
Absolutely.
He's not going to agree to Ukraine and NATO, and he's also not going to agree to getting the territories that he already has, but not more, if Ukraine doesn't join NATO. Like, he's not going to be okay with that.
Putin wants whole Ukraine. For the reason that in terms of their geopolitical goals, they want whole Ukraine, so the Carpathian Mountains will make a beautiful protection against the NATO troops. He won't have to defend that piece of land in case of the upcoming invasion of Europe that will take place soon, according to different European intelligence agencies. He doesn't want, just Donbass. He wants whole Ukraine. His people like Dugin and Medvedev and like everybody talk about it like it's a fact, okay? Another thing, of course, Russians talk a lot about NATO expansion. First of all, there is no document confirming the idea of NATO not expanding or expanding. This Russian propaganda produced a myth about not an inch eastwards. It's not an agreement. It's not signed. It doesn't exist in the real life. You cannot find it anywhere. Google it. Like, there's no document. And another thing, people say that Ukraine basically, not people, but Russian propagandists say that Ukraine basically was invaded because Russia was afraid that Ukraine joins NATO, and Ukraine was literally gonna join NATO in like 2022, and that is why preemptively Russia invaded Ukraine to defend itself. So nobody promised Ukraine membership. We were always rejected. Less than 50% Ukraine. Yeah, less than 50% Ukrainians supported joining NATO, by the way, before 2022. Therefore, even if we had a referendum, we would not reach this less than, according to 3 different agencies, as far as I remember, conducting this poll of the public opinion, less than 50% of Ukrainians before 2022 supported joining NATO. Even like 2014, 70% Ukrainians still considered Russia our best friend, which was crazy. Like, even 2014, when Russia was annexing Crimea and bringing its hybrid troops to Donbass, 70% Ukrainians still considered Russia like not bad guys, like friendly people. But due to what Putin did in Ukraine, of course, our attitude towards Russia changed big time. And I thank them for that, because nothing unites your nation more than, this idea of like Russian brotherhood.
Yeah. I also do want to say to your point that, you know, how you said there was no such agreement as not an inch eastward. So technically, according to Gorbachev, this exact phrase was said, and it was said about Germany. In East and West Germany, it was about NATO troops in West Germany and not an inch east. And Gorbachev himself, who was the man in the room, gave an interview a couple of years ago and was like, this is ludicrous. I was there. And the thing is, we weren't even talking about NATO expansion. That idea wasn't even on the table. We were just talking about East Germany. It had nothing to do with absolutely anything. And it's funny how Russian propaganda twists it. And then to the other point where, like, you know, the invasion of Europe and all of these things, it's like people think it's so far-fetched and so crazy because obviously how would they do it? It doesn't matter how they would do it. It matters that they want to do it, right? This movie that I've been recommending ever since I watched it, Mr. Jones, we actually talked about it before the beginning of the movie. It's not necessarily about World War II, but the journalist Gareth Jones was sounding alarms that World War II was going to begin. And it was in 1933, and he was laughed out of every political room when he was saying that. And at some point, one of the politicians asked him, "Why do you think World War II is going to begin?" And he said, "Goebbels told me," because he had just interviewed Hitler and Goebbels. And people laughed at him and they were like, "Oh, just because Goebbels told you." And his response was also brilliant because it's like, yes, sure, they might not have the means to do it right now. It might look laughable to you right now, but the person who's gaining a lot of momentum and a lot of power wants to attack and wants to have a world war. And this person is telling you that this is exactly their intention. Why would you even allow the possibility of this happening? Or why would you allow the possibility of not shutting it down before it's possible? Because the point is, there is a person hungry for power who wants to have a war. They will find a way to have a war. And same here, Putin's propagandists on TV are telling you every single day, they want to invade Europe, they want to nuke the United States, they want to do these things, right? Sure, half of these things they're not capable of doing at the moment, but they're doing everything for them to be capable to do that later. So when they say it, believe them.
Absolutely, and absolutely when they issue threats on the international level, for example, like Maria Zakharova recently, she said that, yeah, there are high priority targets in Poland, for example, the American and missile defense base that will be hit by Russian troops in case, in case of war, in case we decide to do so. When they issue such threats, especially on the official level, please believe them, because this is exactly what happens. It's not even, the idea is not that it's like, yeah, we should prepare. The idea that you have a terrorist state that thinks that they can threaten everybody with their nukes just because they have them, so everybody should obey. There is absolutely no rules for them. There's no international law for them. It's literally they have power. That's why they decide that they can do whatever they like, just because, they have those ambitions, regardless of what the world thinks. And the world should obey. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people like this beautiful individual who will, who will supervise Ukrainian question in the United States, who unfortunately think that, yes, this is the case, and we should obey to Russia and help them, achieve their goals. He doesn't understand what the international goal, like, the goal is peace. We want people to just stop killing each other. Whenever people say crap like this, whenever people support Russian terrorism, whenever people admire Putin, and at the same time they want peace in Ukraine, that is 100% Russian asset. That is 100% a person who wants Ukrainians to just die, because they are so much afraid of, the nukes that will fly to the United States and kill us. They forget one thing, that the nukes that will, hypothetically fly to the United States and kill them will never be Ukrainian nukes, because Ukraine gave up their nukes so people in the United States could finally peacefully sleep and relax, So they should understand this thing, because there's Russia with enormous amount of nukes. By the way, some of them were received from Ukraine when Ukraine gave them up. And they are basically a terrorist regime, recognized as a terrorist regime by Parliamentary Assembly, by NATO Assembly in 2022. And we have to do something to the terrorist threat, by the way. I mean, there are individuals that would consider negotiating with ISIS if ISIS had like nuclear bomb, for example, and they would give them like easily part of Iraq, part of Syria, literally because, they have bomb. You have to fight against the terrorist threat, and you have to find solution to this, not only the bombs, not only the military aggression, but also the informational aggression, informational warfare that unfortunately people, again, some people in the West, they are too ignorant, thinking that they are too smart to believe Russian propaganda. Literally today I posted on my YouTube a photo of two beautiful American people wearing shirts saying it's better to be a Russian than a Democrat. It's absolutely beautiful. Go check it out. Those are two individuals from like Ohio. One of them from Ohio, I believe. And literally, I don't know when the U.S. changed from this, the biggest democracy in the world, the place that protects, the democratic values shared by whole civilized society, whole civilized community of the world. When did those American patriots started, admiring Putin, who always wanted to see demise of the United States, continuing this Russian agenda that was founded like 100 years ago? When did they change into people who literally say, I would volunteer to become a Russian, I would volunteer to go to Ukraine and kill people, which is better than being a Democrat. This is so ridiculous. I don't care about the political preferences, right? Republican or Democrat. There's always a bunch of values, and if your values include becoming a Russian and going to Ukraine, for example, and you admire the agenda of Kremlin, admire the terrorist Russian regime, then apparently your values are not really as American as you may think. And another funny fact about it, I really doubt that those two guys would literally go to Russia and live in Ussurisk. I want to see that, seriously. Omsk is not an Ohio, trust me.
I mean, Omsk is definitely not Ohio. I think, yeah, there is definitely this sort of I very often hear, when I present the idea of how bad Russia actually, sorry, bronchitis,
True.
how bad. Thanks. Of how bad. I think that needs an explanation in Ukrainian superstitions. If you sneeze at something, that means it's the truth. If you sneezed, if you didn't sneeze, it would be a lie. It's just a confirmation of the truth. So every time that I say that, have you seen Russia is this kind of pardon my French, shithole, right? People are like, well, there are places in America that are bad too. Like, have you been to Ohio or have you been to Indiana? There is nothing to do. Yes, I've been to North Dakota. I've been to Oklahoma. I've been to rural Maine. I've been to rural New Hampshire. I've been to, I can continue going. I've been to a lot of places in America, and a lot of them are red states, and a lot of them are in Midwestern states where you were saying there is nothing to do. And you are correct. These are small towns, they're chain restaurants. There's not much to do. Quite a few people drink, right? It's a thing, but there are roads, there are nice houses. You still kind of have this built where it's a city, a suburb, and then there's farms, right? That's not the case in Russia. In Russia, you have outhouses in most of these cities. And yes, you can say that in America, a lot of people don't have access to to pay for their electricity because it's expensive and all of this stuff. In Russia, people don't have access to electricity because the electrical grid has not been established in their city. It's a bit different. It's not because they don't make enough money to pay for electricity. It's because they simply just don't have the option to even make the money to pay for electricity because there's no electrical grid. So, yeah.
I wonder if a lot of Americans receive like $600 a month, payment salary. It's like I'm not sure because, for example, in Moscow, and you can ask Sanction Divan, my good buddy who lived there. He will tell you that that is like a dream salary of a family, to have like $700 a month. Oh my God, in Moscow, in the capital of the Russian superpower. That is insane. Russians don't have roads. The Russians don't have future. If they have an outhouse, it's not literally because they don't have a sewer system. In majority cases, it's because they don't care, and in United States, you can have business, you can, establish a shoe store. You can sell you can sell like slippers and have some, extra bucks. In Russia, you have to pay bribe in order to do that. You have to bribe the local authorities. You have to bribe police because they currently do whatever the mafia did back in the days. Now it's police. They have this, they call it roof. You have to bribe them, to make sure that everything is good and your area is protected. You have to bribe a lot of people, and it's not necessarily your business will keep running like that because in case your business is successful, you can expect a bunch of guys visiting your place and saying, good business, we will buy it for $100 or else, because like nothing really changed there since 90s. Guys, please don't compare United States and Russia. Don't do that. United States is the world's leading economy. Russia's annual GDP is smaller than in Italy. Open Google Maps, check out the sizes of Russia and Italy, and you will understand everything. And the reason why Russia sucks as a country in terms of economy is literally because instead of providing their people with all kinds of benefits that people in the United States have, like future, like good education, like business, things like that, like protection, like medicine, like food, whatever. Instead of all that, unfortunately, Russians invest more into things like tanks and missiles because they have to kill Ukrainians, and before they had to kill Ukrainians, they had to kill Syrians, and before that, they had to kill Georgians, and before that, Chechens, and then Georgians again. So that is why Russians don't have that wealth like Americans or Europeans do. That is a very, very easy answer to your question. And another thing is, even despite the fact that Russia is world's gas station, right, world's biggest gas source, despite all that, 99% of the income goes into a pocket of Putin, his oligarchs, the ruling Russian elites. Don't look at Arab countries that have a lot of oil. It's not the case, because there this wealth is considered to be to belong to people, to the population. In Russia, it's not the case. It only belongs to Tsar, and Tsar decides. That's why majority Russians live in poverty. That's why they have like those outhouses, and they don't have electricity because it was not established there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in most civilized countries, sorry. It's interesting because in most civilized countries, when you see that like your politicians or your leaders are living this like cushy, lavish life, and they have like these insane cars and castles and houses, you get upset. Russians don't get upset. It's okay. Putin should have all of this. He's the Tsar. it's interesting because they think that him and how wealthy he is represents them, that it's like somehow their merit, right? And it's interesting because this money was taken away from you and from the things that you could be able to have, but you will never have, because all of the money that's supposed to go into infrastructure, into roads, into like public benches and parks and stuff like that is going into his houses and into benches in his houses and into nice pools and whatnot. And it's interesting. People I don't think pay attention to these types of things, because when I showed like people Russian roads, they would go and find normal Russian roads and they're like, well, the road here is fine. It's like, okay, you guys, one of the things that I never thought about until I moved from Ukraine to the United States in 2010 or 11 is public infrastructure, right? Like when you have a square somewhere in Berlin, there's going to be benches, there's going to be like a little coffee booth there, there is going to be like a place for kids to play, there is going to be a little doggy park, so there's going to be trees, and it's going to be fantastic. Squares in Ukraine used to be, up until like I think things really shifted in 2012, 13, 14, after 14 things really went, Ukraine started being very European, right? Before that, you would have a massive square, it'd be like a huge land piece, and it would just be concrete, and there would be no infrastructure for civilians to like sit down and relax. Like it would be like, you know, the Freedom Square or like the Victory Square or whatever, and there would be a tram stop or like public transportation stop near it, and there would be nowhere to sit, because this was kind of how the Soviet Union was. It was very pedestrian unfriendly. And now when you go to squares in Ukraine, like there'd be like a huge landmass. There is benches and there is trees and there is like a little playground and stuff. And it's done not only in like the new modern apartment complexes, it's done just everywhere. And the further we go, the more of these places start popping up in public spaces. And that's kind of public infrastructure where you know your government cares about you because you are spending time outside. You should be able to sit somewhere. You should be able to go grab coffee. You should be able to like enjoy these things. There aren't things like that in Russia. I was even looking at Moscow, right? And even in Moscow, in their capital, these squares are still just like a space of concrete. And there is nothing done for people that want to like hang out there, or people who want to, you kind of are like confined to going to a park, a museum. You have to go to like particular places. And that itself should tell you a lot. I mean, this is Moscow, right? In other places, it's like if there is concrete and it's not cracking on those squares, that's already very nice. That's already quite sweet, you know, quite sweet of them to keep it intact.
Oh my God! When I visited the Red Square in 2012, and I two things I saw. First was big red. Well, it was well fed, though, I can confirm. Big red and two girls like literally vomiting on the street. I realized everything. But speaking of wealth, you know, speaking of Putin, there is this theory of broken windows. This theory emerged in New York, as far as I remember, in the 80s, and it tells us that if, like, the district, the block of the city looks bad, there's broken windows and stuff like that, and graffiti everywhere, then the crimes will be, you know, conducted in this area. The crime level here will be much higher. But if you care about this place and you fix the windows, you know, clean the streets, etc., then the crimes will decrease. And like this theory was proved in New York in the 80s. It's, again, as far as I remember, fix me if I'm wrong. Russians don't care about it. Ukrainians care about it since, as you said, like early 2010s. I remember that, you know, even in the times of Yanukovych, who literally brought the war in Ukraine, but we had Euro 2012 when whole world came to Ukraine before the revolution, and they enjoyed football and everything was so cool. They enjoyed this beautiful infrastructure that Ukraine has. And then when the Russian invasion began and Russians were coming to Bucha, to Irpin, you know, to those places where people have, that's like basically Ukrainian middle class. And when they were making those videos, like, look, they have like plastic windows. They're not wooden, they have hot water. Look how those rich Ukrainians live, that was crazy because they don't have that. They're literally barbarians who just came to a civilized country expecting to see something worse than in Russia. And they were extremely surprised to see that, oh my God, it's not like they showed us in the news. But, speaking of the Putin's wealth, again, Yanukovych, I'm not justifying him because Yanukovych also had this mini town only for himself called Mezhigirya, that huge complex, like the size of an actual town, where currently we have Museum of Corruption, like his freaking castles and everything else. And he had like those extremely expensive curtains, like 5 meters tall and everything else, literally because because kids in a school, for example, instead of some good proper nutrition, they were given some stinking freaking porridge, and because of that he could afford himself like expensive curtains, and cars, those Mercedes, those armored cars that were found in the garage, and private zoo, and everything else. Russians will never understand that. Ukrainians basically want the revolution of dignity. Yanukovych fled. We raided this place and we turned it into a museum of corruption, bringing refugees there because it can accommodate a lot of refugees from Donbass, for example. We show whole world what corruption does to your country. Ukraine is blamed for that because there are still people who say no, but he was democratically elected and it was a coup. You're not supposed to fight for your rights. You're not supposed to fight for democracy when your dictator wants to do bad things to your people, your country, suppress your freedoms and repress everybody who opposes them. Don't fight for your rights. People justifying Yanukovych, they're so funny considering the fact that basically Yanukovych was attempting to become like Lukashenko #2. He attempted, to become this like local gang lord who tried to turn Ukraine into a Belarus #2. He failed because Ukrainians will never tolerate injustice and we will always fight for democracy, for our freedoms. And this basically answers the question why there are some people in the United States, for example, or in like France or in Germany, who support Putin. It's not because they want to take the best Russian experience. What is the best Russian experience? Roads, medicine, best education in the world? I don't know. Highest level of AIDS in Europe is not Russian best experience, I tell you that. I think, what they want is they don't want democracy. Those people generally look at Putin as, this like gangster badass who has nukes, and he does whatever he likes. And basically those people, apparently because they have some kind of complexes, maybe they never reached any like significant achievements in their life or whatever. This is something they dream about, to be like him. In Russian language, in Russian prisoner language, we have this saying like to become successful, прийти к успеху. This is exactly what they want, that is just my observation.
No, I agree with you. It's kind of like the people that like these oligarchs like Elon Musk and don't see what's wrong with them and don't see like how what they're doing is directly affecting them are the people that know they could never get this successful but want to, as in like this, this rich, not this successful, but want to. And so they're defending it in case one day this happens to them. It's almost like personal to them, right? It's like, oh, if I win the lottery, I don't want people to like say these awful things about me, but it's like, okay, winning the lottery is very different than stealing money from people, from constituents, or in Elon Musk's case, like, selling crappy cars and changing policy and blackmailing politicians to change policies so you wouldn't have to be responsible for everything that breaks in them and stuff like that. It's like it's the same as Yulia Navalnaya. The woman who buys $900 shoes, but she doesn't have a job because her job is basically like, I don't even, she takes this money from the costs that Russians and people worldwide donate to her foundation that genuinely, objectively does nothing, right? She just goes on TV and talks about, oh my gosh, poor Russia, no one in Russia is guilty, just Putin, right? But they donate to her, and she, being a woman who lives off of charitable donations, buys cars, expensive houses, expensive clothing, all of this stuff. And Russians defend it. And it's like, you guys, it's your money. You donated this money for this woman to go and do something for Russia to change, or for Putin to be like fought off, or for like some initiatives to be implemented. And this money is being taken and put into shoes, and you defend it.
There are wounded Ukrainian soldiers currently fighting against Putin's regime. Go to Germany and help them. Or if you consider yourself like, person who supports Russia and doesn't want to support Ukraine, there are wounded Russian soldiers fighting for Ukraine against Putin. Go and help them. They're also receiving treatment in European hospitals because they are members of the armed forces of Ukraine. But they are ethnically Russian. They are your people. Go and help them. But of course, we will never see Yulia Navalnaya visiting like hospitals with soldiers because, like, why? It doesn't correlate with her agenda. What correlates with her agenda is to make sure Russia will never pay reparations for its atrocious war in Ukraine, to make sure that Russia will never pay reparations for Holodomor, for example, right, for the artificial famine, because they don't want responsibility, they want power. And basically, Yulia Navalnaya, in my personal opinion, again, it's literally like Putin, only Yulia. It's the same stuff.
That's the thing. It's like her agenda is really to become the leader of Russia, and for no one to hold Russia accountable, because she wants to continue doing what Putin is doing, just with a liberal mask on it. Her agenda is to make sure that she continues doing nothing and getting paid for it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to understand whether this person, Russian person, is good, there are two ways to understand it. One way is good Russian. You don't see this person in the thermal scope. Okay, it doesn't produce heat. That is from my frontline experience. And second thing, this person says, I respect the idea of paying reparations to Ukraine. I'm sorry for what my country is doing to you. This is our guilt, our responsibility, and we need to apologize to Ukrainians, to Georgians, to Syrians, to Chechens, to all the people that we harmed, right? That is another way to recognize such person. I know like two, maybe three.
I know one, literally one. And that's the thing. It's like, I've actually had conversations with so many Russians, and even those that don't support the war, if you dig deeper, they don't support the war because of sanctions on them and because of how hard their life is, not because of how wrong it is. So it's another thing. It's like people keep meeting all of these Russians that don't support the war, but they don't ask them why they don't support the war.
Yeah, right. Sorry for interrupting, but there's so many representatives of the Russian so-called opposition currently, of course, hiding outside Russia, not fighting, not doing anything. Guys, Ukrainians, when we had this corrupted pro-Russian government, we had two revolutions because we wanted to protect freedom, democracy, and law. And I participated in two revolutions, in Orange and in the Revolution of Dignity, because I was ashamed as a Ukrainian, because Ukrainians were known as like mafioso, Ukrainian bandits, Ukrainian oligarchs, Ukrainians selling freaking air defenses to Iraq, to Saddam Hussein. That is nothing. That is not something I'm proud of, right? Because I know that this stuff will be shooting down American airplanes, and
Yeah.
I was so much ashamed. I didn't want people to talk about Ukrainians as, as those people, right?
Mhm.
As of Russians, as we're talking about Russians nowadays. And I participated in two revolutions literally because of that. And also because I supported like people who I consider to be the best people in the world, right? Because they showed that they're worth it, that they can be friendly, they can be peaceful, they can be pro-European, democratic, and this was something that inspired me. Russians will not do that, and again, returning to those people, justifying Yanukovych and everything else, saying that no, you should not fight for your rights. What you did was wrong. Actually, they literally don't understand that sometimes you should defend democracy using fists or weapons, but you should fight for it. And as a Ukrainian, I'm proud that we did it. I'm proud of the fact that we look at Europe as our homeland, basically, right? That we want to return to. So, God, I can talk about the Russian so-called opposition a lot, but I don't think that this will make people happy.
Yeah, I don't think this will make people happy either. And I think that these conversations also can last, like, I don't know, 72 hours without taking a break to just cover the tip of the iceberg of that. But an interesting thing to all of these sort of financial troubles that we have been talking about is the collapse of the Russian ruble. It looks like Russian ruble is rubble, and I mean we've called it that before, but it's really, really deteriorating and really fast. It's almost like every hour it went from like 110 rubles for a dollar to 112 rubles for a dollar to 114 rubles for a dollar. I think it's at 120 now, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, let me check. Um,
But what else do you expect after like all those manipulations you do with your economy, with artificially keeping the course of ruble
yeah.
on the level of like 50 cent, for ruble and things like that? Remember what they did last year. Last year, when all kinds of pro-Russian assets were screaming like, "Look, Russia is actually winning this war because your sanctions don't work. Ruble is stronger than than ever before." But that is exactly what you expect. I know that, for example, currently in Russian stores, all of their utilities for the house, like washing machines, like dishwashers, etc. They instantly became 10% more expensive. They were expensive before, but now like it's even worse. And like we were talking about people in Europe who see like their leaders having like expensive cars and getting upset. It's true, but at the same time, their leaders must have such expensive things, to be upset. Because if there is a family in like Germany, for example, that lives in a private house in the downtown and they have a car, this family would be considered freaking oligarchs in I don't know, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, because people don't live like that in Russia. They don't understand how, like, where do you get the money from? And in the future, situation will be worse and worse, because we already saw shortages of sugar in Russia. We saw the shortages of chicken in Russia, then logically shortages of eggs, then fish. Now ruble collapses, and I believe approximately middle 2025, maybe 2026, it's anticipated, by the way, by different people who are much smarter than me. I'm not an economist, but I'm watching people like I got Jake Pro, of course, he knows a lot. And Mr. Burnett, by the way, on YouTube. Also, please subscribe. He's extremely cool. He's an economist, a PhD. That is exactly what we will expect to see, the collapse of the Russian economy, because you cannot have a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Also, you cannot have like effective effective military campaign in Syria, because you're throwing everything you have to Ukraine, burning all the tanks you cannot reproduce. And also, your economy sucks because you are meddling with the course of ruble artificially. You were only allowing other countries buy things in ruble. You don't do that in the modern world where we have global economy. You like it or not, but this is the fact. This is the world we live in, and economy doesn't work like that. You will eventually turn into North Korea, where people literally have nothing, right? And even, I don't know, their leader, I don't think that he can be even like a bit compared to Putin, even though they have like nukes and advanced aircraft, let's call it this way, because they were bought in Russia. But even him, I think he's not really rich. He cannot be compared to like modern Russian oligarchs at all, because like they don't have anything and their economy basically sucks. But again, I'm not an economist. I'm just talking about things I can observe myself. Don't quote me on that.
Well, a bunch of economists from the Telegraph actually wrote an article that Kremlin tries to reassure panicking Russians over collapsing ruble. War and sanctions hit the economy much harder than Moscow predicted, and this is just one of the many articles that came out today. That are talking about this. It's apparently like much worse than Russia is trying to let the world see. And I'm actually, for one, very excited of how it's going to affect the population, because this is what we were saying. It's like the average Russian is not going to experience exactly what's happening.
Oh my God, we have a guest.
We have two guests. See, and they're yeah. The reason why there is an apocalypse behind my back is because they're playing, and I think they need a walk. But an average Russian wouldn't be able to see the issues that are happening until it gets so bad, because an average Russian is so poor that it's like they will not see the level of of extreme poverty and destitution until it crosses the line. And I think that ruble deflating so much is going to actually be now echoing at that type of population, and that might actually, we might see some, I don't know, something in Russia, but in reality it's just, it's the oligarchs that are going to be feeling the impact, because again, it's not like regular people are going to be doing anything against that.
For many years, Ukrainians had this inferiority complex because people in Russia, even though they were poor, but the average salary, for example, in like Moscow Oblast was still bigger than in Ukraine, right? Because one way or another, Russia was considered a superpower, which of course, logical. 2022, it cracked me up so bad when the ruble collapsed, and all of a sudden Ukrainians started receiving salaries that were bigger than in Russia. And after that, I realized that, looking at all those queues and fights for sugar, when Ukraine was bombed and hit with missiles every day, and we had so much death around us, but we never had anything like, Russian fights in the queue for sugar. That was insane. It was, cooler than observing people during COVID in like stores massively buying toilet paper.
Black Friday in America circa like 15 years ago, because Black Friday now is not the same. But like when the discounts were insane and you would open the doors and people were just like storming in. So that's kind of very similar to, to Russia today with bread queues, and also very reminiscent of the Soviet Union in a way. But I mean, I guess an average Russian is okay with that, so it's not like they're going to notice the difference or care too much about it, which is sad, both sad and and just it is what it is.
Not sad, as a Ukrainian, as a Ukrainian, I approve this. As a Ukrainian, I approve all the crap that happens to Russia because
it's
they deserve it.
Because they're not going to learn from it. They're going to blame someone else. Like they're going to blame Ukraine. It's similar to how, people are blaming Ukraine for, oh, we're going to be in world war if Ukraine strikes back. It, yeah, we're not going to be in a world war because Russia attacked Ukraine. We're going to be in a world war because Ukraine defends itself. Cool. Thanks. Let's blame Ukraine.
Yeah, don't ever go full Joe Rogan. It's really, really bad. Yeah. But again, regarding Russian ruble, again, I remember that Putin built his whole election campaign in the country where you can only vote for Putin. But anyways, he built his whole election campaign on his promises never to return to the crisis of 1990s in Russia, because 1990s were extremely hard for Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, less though for Russians, because Russia basically stole all the money from the Western Soviet republics like Ukraine. People don't know this, but Ukrainians who had savings in the Sberbank, they all lost their savings as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, because Moscow took all those savings to the Moscovia, to the Moscow Sberbank. That's why Russians, one of the reasons why they had bigger salaries than Ukrainians was because they stole our money. But Putin was promising his voters that they will never return back to the crisis of 1990s. They will never return back to the 1990s. I will save you. I will protect you. And now that is exactly what we see, but the situation is even worse, because here they rolled back to 1980s, when they have this Iron Curtain, when Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world, when people despise and afraid of them because they're terrorists. Their closest allies are North Korea and Iran. And this is what they deserve. So literally, I don't really care what happens to them now. Whoever they blame for that is their very, very own problem. Maybe they will become smarter, maybe not, but literally I don't care. If something bad happens to Russia, or Russian population that was celebrating the war in Ukraine, as a Ukrainian, I approve that. I'm sorry, but this is the fact. I'm a Ukrainian. I have rights.
Yeah, I think I do too. I mean, when I was saying it's sad, it's because they won't learn, not because it's sad to see this. It's like they really need to go through that to be able to learn something. It's the same as we were saying, like Russians don't have collective guilt or responsibility, and until they have that, their country is never going to change. It's always going to be the same thing as Putin, the Tsar, the leader, and people just following him, right? So that needs to change. But at least I think a good conclusion to what we've talked about today is that we're finally seeing these sanctions really start hitting, and we're finally seeing kind of like the downfall of Russia and the Russian economy unravel full force. And it's very interesting to see where it's going to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was expected. Again, we are not sanctioning, speaking about the world, we are not sanctioning like sausage in Russian grocery stores. We are not sanctioning like potato. Generally, we are sanctioning the equipment and parts and electronics that help Russians build rockets to kill Ukrainians. That is the main thing that is sanctioned. Also Russian oil and gas, because Russia invests them in building those rockets, building tanks, or buying stuff like artillery shells from North Korea. That is something that is sanctioned. But it is logical that when you sanction some of those sectors of Russian market, other sectors will also start collapsing. Especially if you're scheming, you're trying to build schemes to evade sanctions. This is not how it works, because we live in the 21st century, 2024 outside, guys. Soon to be 2025. You have to think about collective benefits, collective partnership, collective security, by the way. This is not how modern world works. You need to have respect on the first place towards other people, and then everything will be fine. Everything starts with the respect.
I agree. I think respect and responsibility. And until we can impose that, no sanctions are ever going to be enough.
Yeah, I agree on that.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot from it, because I really hope that you do. I think we're at the brink of history, and I think we're finally getting to a moment where it's very important not to give up and not to force Ukraine into negotiations, because Russia is getting what Russia deserves, and we are this close to finally winning and defeating it. If you enjoyed this conversation and you want to hear more conversations like it, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications so you don't miss these conversations. Also, like this video, send it to a friend. You never know who might enjoy it as well. And of course, sending it to a friend will help the algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to comment, leave your questions, suggestions, and constructive criticism. I read all of it and I really appreciate hearing from you. Till next time.